Welcome for your next speaker, ladies and gentlemen. He's the former Minister for Resources. It's Keith Pitt.
Well, good morning. Thank you so much for the warm welcome. How good is it to be here, even though it's a Sunday? Fantastic. And being a Sunday, ladies and gentlemen, I thought I'd make it a bit lighter this morning, a bit more story-like, a fairy tale perhaps. I have two pieces of paper, facts and fiction. Facts and fiction. Before I begin, can I just acknowledge the taxpayers and the ratepayers in the room? And thank them so much for their contribution to paying for our hospitals and schools and aged care facilities and roads and all the things that we all need. And the NDIS. And ladies and gentlemen, to thank the organisers. This has been a fantastic conference so far and already. Now, like all good stories, all good fairy tales, fantasies, novellas, sometimes horror shows, they all start sort of the same. So, once upon a time, a long time ago. Well, actually, it wasn't that long, it's sort of now. So, now, in the country of Australia, this is the highlight. The country of Australia. How good is Australia? There is nowhere better than our country. So, right now, in Australia, there was a dastardly villain. And given this is a fiction, a fantasy, well, we should give that villain a name. So, for today, I've decided I'll call him Chris. Now, Chris needs a last name, and I thought I'd go to the crowd for suggestions. Have we got any suggestions for our dastardly villain? It's a mango. Bowen's a mango. But look, sure, it sounds a bit weird, but we'll go with that. So, our dastardly villain, Chris Bowen. Now, Chris has a dream. He has a dream. And you've seen that dream play out over the last year, and there were some comments from the former chief scientist which really narrowed down what that dream meant. And that dream is forests of wind turbines and oceans of solar panels. Now, that's not my dream. I like our forests as they are. And I, in particular, like our agricultural land not covered in solar panels and wind turbines and producing food. Food for our country, food for the world. There's a lot of debate around what's fact and what's fiction. So I thought I'd dig up just a few things and we can test them with the crowd as we go. But our dastardly villain, Chris. He's had a couple of quotes, so we'll test whether you think this is fact or fiction. We'll cut power bills by $275 for homes by 2025 compared to today. What do we think? Fiction. Excellent. Fiction. We will install 47 megawatt wind turbines every month. Fiction. We'll install 22,500 watt solar panels every day and 60 million by 2030. Fiction. Now that is without getting to transmission lines. So tens of thousands of kilometres of transmission lines. And I've got to tell you, they're not going through Mossman. They're not going through Manly Beach. They're not showing up at Bondi. They are going through regional Australia. And they're just not necessary. I mean, in the terms of the mix of our energy production in this country, why on earth would you invest so much in something that simply doesn't work? It doesn't work. If you've got solar panels on your roof to help you with your bills, knock yourself out, that's great. But the idea that it will run Australia's economy, that for those of us who might be in the hospital needing a quadruple bypass, we'll have to rely on the weather. For those of us in aged care facilities, it's kind of like our air conditioning. Have to look out the window to see if they can turn it on. It just doesn't work. So let's come back to some facts and let's have a look at what happens with these products, because they only last between 20 and 30 years at best. Now that is assuming they don't get hit by a hailstorm, they don't get hit by a cyclone, we don't have a bushfire, which happens in Australia, I've heard of them before. But what our dastardly villain doesn't want to talk about is what will we do with the waste? What do we do with the waste? So some of the research that I've had done through the Parliamentary Library and others, there will be 43 million tonnes estimated of wind turbine blades alone by 2050 around the globe. 43 million tonne. They're a carbon fibre composite, they can't be recycled, there's not much you can do with them. I think Nick Cater found some up on a farm in the north somewhere. In Australia alone, there'll be 100,000 tonne of solar panel waste by 2035. And when they talk about recycling solar panels, the most recent data I could find is only 17% of that solar panel weight can actually be currently recycled. It is generally the glass and the aluminium, and that is about all. That is without an 800-tonne concrete base inside these wind turbines. Now, our dastardly villain Chris is very keen on East Coast New South Wales, offshore wind turbines. Anyone heard of those? Now, I went and did some research. The height cap for those wind turbines is 260 metres. Now, for those of you who live in Sydney, there's a thing down the road here, the Harbour Bridge, I think it's called. That is twice the height of the Sydney Harbour Bridge. And a 5,000 megawatt wind farm off East Coast New South Wales. Well, let's be kind. Let's say they're 5 megawatts each. That is 1,000 turbines. 1,000 turbines. Now, I've got some mates in the Surfrider Foundation. They were very much not keen on what was known as PEP 11, offshore gas exploration licence. I don't know if anyone's seen any of that. They used to love standing there and they'd have a silhouette of a drilling rig and they'd hold it up against the ocean and say, you really don't want one of these over the horizon where you can't see it. But what on earth will you do with 1,000 offshore wind turbines when they come to the end of their useful life? They have to be removed and they still only have a utilisation rate of around 33, 35%. What will you do? So we come back to facts versus fiction. Now, there's this thing called nuclear energy. Now, our dastardly villain, Chris, has the chance here to be Australia's hero. He genuinely does, to be Australia's hero. And for those of you who watch the news, and I know there's a few, you might have seen that the Prime Minister has recommitted to a thing called AUKUS. Probably the most important security pact this country has ever signed. Ever. And if we look at what that means for nuclear production, for nuclear technology, for nuclear energy in this country, well, let's run through the things which have been a problem in the past. So let's start with technical capacity. Well, the Federal Labor Party has committed there will be at least 10,000 plus individuals in this country who are employed, involved in a domestic nuclear industry so we can build nuclear submarines in Adelaide. Done. 10,000. We have to have them. There's a moratorium that prevents us from using it. Well, they've lifted that moratorium already, because how else do you build submarines in Adelaide that have a nuclear reactor while there's a moratorium? Done. You can check that box. No problems at all. What will we do with the waste? Well, a Virginia-class sub runs for about 30 years, and at the end of that time, there will be high-level radioactive waste that has to be dealt with. This country has signed an agreement, an international agreement, like many others, that says we'll deal with our own waste. So somewhere between now and the end of life for these new nuclear submarines, we have to deal with high-level nuclear waste. Check. So we have technical capacity, we have lifted the moratorium, we are dealing with the waste. Why? Why? If we can put these things in what is a sophisticated tin can, now admittedly an expensive but very sophisticated tin can, a couple hundred metres under the ocean with a nuclear reactor, will run for 30 years to benefit our nation and our people and our security, then why on earth can't we put it on a block of concrete on one of the most stable countries in the world when everything else is done? So for us, on our side, I think there's only one thing left, because we already have technical capability, we already have the moratorium being lifted in places, we already have an issue to deal with the waste, and we have to address that. And the federal Labor government has to do all of those. So for us as the opposition, if we want to fight for nuclear energy, for baseload power that is affordable, that is reliable, that works every single minute of the day without having to look out the window, we just have to decide where to put them. That is all. Now, can I guarantee you, you won't get a nuclear reactor in every suburb in Australia. But I'll also guarantee, with our works of fiction, that you will get a letterbox drop, a YouTube message, any sort of profile in the press that says you are getting a nuclear reactor just down the road from you. and that will come from the Federal Labor Party. Now, that is wrong. If we look out at coal-fired power stations, I'm a great believer in maintaining our fleet because most of them, particularly in Queensland, you own them, right? They are yours. Oh, they are taxpayer assets. You have paid for them. Why wouldn't you benefit from them? Why not? So we should maintain those fleets for as long as possible because they will continue to produce cost-effective electricity that works. And if we look to change to nuclear in the future, well, they are a good location. Now, clearly, there are some locations where you've got geotechnical issues. You're not going to put them where there's a lot of earthquakes. We're just not going to do that. But every coal-fired power station that I know has a very large water source that's already there. They have this thing called transmission lines and substations. Have you ever heard of them? And they're there already. So you don't have to build anymore. Can you imagine trying to build this 28,000 kilometres of transmission through communities that simply don't want them? And I do want to give a shout out to Barnaby Joyce because he's doing a good job on nailing this issue in the regions. Well done, Barnaby. So what will we do with the waste from solar and wind? Where will we put it? And there is so much of it. And we come back to nuclear and there's always this argument about waste from nuclear. Well, guess what? There's this place called the United States and they've got some nuclear reactors and their Department of Energy says that those nuclear reactors, and keep in mind, most of them old technology, old fleet, old school, they power 70 million homes in the United States. Not people, 70 million homes every single year, and they produce about 2,000 tonne of waste. Now that sounds terrible, 2,000 tonne, but waste from nuclear reactors is so incredibly dense, incredibly dense. That is the size of half an Olympic swimming pool. So can you imagine new technology reactors in Australia where we can potentially recycle the waste and reutilise it afterwards anyway as this progresses? 50 nations around the world already using it, looking to move towards it. Because if zero emissions floats your boat, but you want the lights to stay on, this is it, right? There are no other options. This is the only option. And with the few minutes I've got left, I want to come back to something. I think Chris Bowen should be a hero, right? I genuinely think he should. Because what they're doing right now won't work and it will cost every single one of you more than you can afford. And for the people I represent, they just can't pay. We have one of the lowest per capita incomes in the country. For myself and Lou O'Brien, the member for Wide Bay that's here. They can't, $20 a week for them is too much. So we'll fight this. We will fight this every way, and I have done for 10 years and I'll continue to do it. But ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to come back to the voice. Now, many of you will be thinking, what on earth has that got to do with electricity generation? There's a small town in South Australia called Kimber. Now, the people of Kimber have just gone through 8 years of consultation, argument, to try and land Australia's low-level radioactive waste facility, a facility that this country desperately needs, which we have been trying to secure for more than 4 decades. 4 decades. 16 ministers have attempted to get this done. I allocated a site in my previous role and it's just been knocked over by the courts. Now, the judges made their decision and that's fine. But it was brought by the Bengala people and that's fine. They're entitled to do that. But in terms of native title, the block of land had none. In terms of the vote, well, none of the Bengala people, as far as I'm aware, lived in the region, so they didn't get to vote. It had 63% support from the local community. Now, that was enough to change the marriage laws in Australia. And yet, we now have a federal Labor government who will not appeal that decision. And in fact, they could remake the decision tomorrow. They could remake the decision. They could deem the site. We can stand up in Parliament and say, that's it, it is going there. So after tens of millions of dollars, and keep in mind, we started with 26 locations, narrowed down to 3. Good work from Senator Matt Canavan, who I know some of you have heard of. And guess what? You eventually have to get to 1. Kimber was the right site, freehold land, support from the community. It's in the right place. They wanted it because they wanted to drive their economy. They knew into the future that would be good for them. And there are 700,000 doses of nuclear medicine issued from just down the road at Lucas Heights every single year to treat patients for cancer, to do PET scans. And we will run out of space for the storage of the waste that produce. And it is gloves and gowns and disposables and needles. And we just have to deal with them. and now we have gone back to the beginning. And to me, that is unacceptable. Since when were the minority the priority? Every single Australian needs this facility. It should be delivered. And I want to apologise to the people of Kimber for what they've gone through, because they fought for this. And can you imagine how tough that is in your local community? Rowan Ramsey, the local member, is just an absolute champion. And I think it's really damaged him a lot, because he was hopeful that this would get over the line. But come back to nuclear. If we can't land a low-level radioactive waste facility in Australia for gloves and gowns, how on earth are we going to manage high-level out of AUKUS? So it is a dangerous time over the next few years. But federal Labor has committed to this. We will hold them to account. We expect they'll deliver them. And Chris Bowen has the opportunity to be a hero. Let's just get on with it, deliver nuclear energy for this country. It is in our national interests, and let's fight for what's right. Thanks so much. Good morning. God bless. Safe travels.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was Keith Pitt. Let's give Keith a big hand.